This is Mama's High on Chai. Hey Mamas, this is your host Simi with Mama's High on Chai, a podcast all about being a South Asian and being a mama. Hi everyone, so today I'm joined by Reena Parekh, who is a fitness coach in the Toronto area, and she also provides online training and works specifically with women. Reena specializes in pre and postnatal fitness and helps women regain their strength during pregnancy and after childbirth. And she's also very passionate about breaking and destigmatizing some of the cultural stigmas around pelvic health that still exist in the South Asian community. So welcome, Reena, and thank you so much for coming on this podcast and sharing your insights with us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
So, Reena, tell us a little bit about your own story, specifically like your journey with pre and during your pregnancy, postpartum, and how it relates to what you do today.
Yeah, well, I mean, how much time do we have? So I am a mother of two kids,
Yeah.
5 and 14 months.
Yeah.
And really, I became a personal trainer after my son was born. And the reason for that was because I was let go from my corporate job while I was on maternity leave. And in the city of Toronto, childcare is exponentially expensive. So unless you are, in a career that you absolutely love and it means the world to you to go back, for me, I wasn't in that place at the time. And I knew going back to corporate life, which was event management at the time, that would mean traveling quite a bit and working evenings and weekends. So I decided not to go back and also save that money on daycare costs. At the same time, my husband had opened his restaurant. So the demands on him were quite high at the time as he was figuring out this new life of restaurant ownership and fatherhood as well. So we decided that I was going to stay home. And once my maternity leave ended, and that's a year here in Canada, I was starting to get a little bit itchy about what I wanted to do. I was already teaching group fitness on the side, and so I thought a natural progression would be to start personal training. So I started working with postpartum women and seeing them in their homes. And that eventually evolved into boot camps in the park with them. It evolved into me learning more about what it means to be postpartum and how that relates back to your fitness, because it just wasn't the same for me. I mean, I was not at the same level I used to be at when I started teaching again. And that journey in itself was quite a bit of an experience, you could say. And then I had my second daughter, and that pregnancy was a lot more challenging. When I was pregnant with her, I was also into strength training 4 days a week. And I was learning how to lift during pregnancy at the time. And I learned so much about my body and what it was capable of doing and where I needed to scale back. But I don't think that kind of knowledge is necessarily out there in a form that is accessible to people, especially in the South Asian community. My family was always looking at my fitness videos going like, should you be lifting that much? You should really just stop working.
Right.
And I was working in a gym as well. And my clients were also people who lifted barbells and heavy weights. And so my job was physical, and I was also very committed to working out. But what happened was, because the pregnancy was difficult, it ended up giving me some pelvic health issues at the time. And so when I went to see my physiotherapist, I was diagnosed with hypertonic pelvic floor, which is when your muscles are too tight, and also a low-grade prolapse. And so that was pretty devastating for me at the time. It didn't mean I had to stop working out, but I had to scale back big time and prepare my body for birth at the time. And once my daughter was born, I was diagnosed with a second low-grade prolapse, and that was because of a slightly traumatic birth. and the amount of stress that was put on my body during the birth. And so during that late time in that second pregnancy and my postpartum experience, between that, the amount that I dove into learning about my own body and what that meant for my training after I had my baby and I was recovered from the birth led me to really become passionate about speaking out more about this, because there's just so much overwhelm out there in terms of information. If you Google pregnancy fitness, you're going to get 100,000 results or more, actually.
Right.
And everyone is saying something different. You're going to find people who are saying, well, don't do any of this, you can only do this. And then you're going to find people who are into competitive sports and lifting, and they are just going full force right after they've had birth. And so
Right.
it's where's the in between for women like myself who are athletes at the gym and yet don't have a guided path to getting back to that strength that I once had, but safely, because now I'm talking about 2 prolapses. I was lucky I didn't have abdominal separation to the degree where my core wasn't functional, but a lot of women experience that too. And so your body just doesn't feel the same, it doesn't look the same, and the more kids you have, the more your body changes. And so we're not going to bounce back like a lot of social media influencers show us.
Right.
And we need a bit of a reality check. And then when you add the cultural aspect of it, nobody ever really talks about it. So that's where my journey really began. And I would say that I really honed in on this niche of supporting women through that period of maintaining their strength through pregnancy, but also really in that postpartum period of, once you're recovered and you've done some rehab with a pelvic floor physiotherapist, how do you get back to whatever it is that you loved doing before at that same level or even stronger?
Right. And can you explain a little bit about the low-grade prolapse that you were talking about?
Yes. So prolapse, if you're not familiar with it, is when your internal organs start to descend into the vaginal wall.
Right.
So for me, I have a rectocele, or had, which is the rectum falling into the vaginal wall. That was causing a lot of discomfort late in my pregnancy. And then after pregnancy, I was diagnosed with a cystocele, which is descending of the bladder into the vaginal wall.
You mentioned, some women have a lot of abdominal separation, and you were lucky that you didn't have it. And makes me wonder if a lot of women go through pelvic floor issues without even knowing about them their entire lives. Like, I understand you went to your physiotherapist and were properly diagnosed, but is it possible that you could have these issues and not know about them? Or is it just maybe if you're experiencing them and it's not really affecting your life as much, that's when you don't know about it?
Absolutely. So the stats show that 100% of women have diastasis, and diastasis recti is the separation of the abdominal wall. And so that's a natural progression of pregnancy because our bodies have to stretch. So it doesn't mean that your abdominals are broken. What we want to look for after birth is, how has that separation healed in those first 6 to 8 weeks postpartum? And is your core still functional? So you could have a separation with a core that is still functional. And what that means is that you're able to engage your core and brace during day-to-day life, or if you're lifting something or moving around. And pelvic floor dysfunction affects 1 in 3 women. The
Right.
more births you have, the more likely you are to experience some type of dysfunction. And that doesn't matter whether it's a cesarean birth or a vaginal birth. Birth is birth. And so that those things affect us in different ways. And absolutely, you can go through life without any symptoms. And, for a lot of women, if they have any type of low grade prolapse, but they don't feel anything, that's okay. Is it going to affect you in the long run? Maybe. It's really hard to tell because research is still catching up to that kind of information. And then we get to other types of dysfunction like leaking. And, we often make jokes like, oh, I can't laugh too hard or I'm going to pee my pants. Or if I can't do jumping jacks or go on the trampoline. Or if I laugh too hard, if I sneeze or if I cough, these things can lead to leaking. But you're like, we're told to write it off as a joke, or it's just a little bit. That's just part of motherhood. And the issue with that is that something like that is a red flag, no matter how little the leakage is. And that could potentially lead to issues down the road. So it's not a guarantee that things are going to get worse, but it's something that you can fix and have those symptoms alleviated with the help and support of a pelvic floor physiotherapist.
Right. I consider myself an athlete as well. After childbirth, after the birth of my second child, that's when I actually came across diastasis. And that's online through social media. I never knew about it before. I always thought like, okay, I can't do certain exercises, core exercises that that will make it worse, right? So how do women know what kind of exercises to do and what not?
Well, that's why someone like me exists.
Yeah.
And so when you look on the internet, you're going to find a bunch of lists that say do this, but don't do that. And a lot of those lists will keep you at the very beginner level of exercise, which is necessary in postpartum. You're almost starting from scratch. You have to do the rehab and recovery piece. And the thing is that we all have individual goals. So for me, it was to get back to strength training. For my neighbor, it was for her to get back to running. She's run marathons. For a client of mine, it was for her to get back to the level of athleticism she had when she was a triathlete. So we all have individual goals. So someone like me can come in and say, okay, well, let's work on progressing your exercises, because you can't stay on a mat doing these breathing exercises forever because they are so boring. And especially for somebody who is an athlete and has the brain of an athlete and wants to progress and wants to challenge themselves, and yet they don't know how to progress themselves safely, because there is a big mental piece around pelvic health. And there's a lot of fear around making things worse, because this is our body we're talking about, and our physical health and our day-to-day lives are impacted as well. And so the key for somebody like me is to come in and say, let's work alongside your pelvic floor physiotherapist if that's what we need to do, or let's continue doing the rehab and recovery while we're slowly progressing you towards your goal. So we're going to work towards that and provide a path that makes sense. And during that time, you're going to learn a lot of body awareness. This isn't just as listening to your body, as in, I feel tired today. This is actually really listening to what your body is saying, how your body feels, how your muscles are firing during exercise and after. And so we learn as we go. And so there really isn't a one size fits all solution to any journey.
Right. My experience with weightlifting after childbirth, I remember being so pumped to get back in shape. And, I totally ignored my pelvic health, like never really thought about that as an element that I need to focus on. But really, like, as I would get into heavy weightlifting, and sometimes, doing certain exercises like squats, or just lifting something in an odd way. I would know, your body knows when you're doing something you shouldn't, right? Like, I would have, like, the next day I would have like a tight hip, or maybe like a pubic bone shift or something, while I'm lifting, and I'm like, I shouldn't have done that. So, and I feel that that's part of how in our culture we're really never taught to be in tune with our bodies. right? And part of it is the pressure
Mm-hmm.
that comes from social media, and there's that element that's missing to really take care of the rehab element. Like, okay, no, I just gave birth, and or even if it's like a couple years after you gave birth, you carried a human being in your, inside your body,
Mm-hmm.
and so can you speak for that? Like, what are your thoughts on the cultural taboos and the social pressures?
I mean, I don't know about how it was in your household, but in our household, we didn't even talk about our bodies. We were just told to cover up.
Right, yeah.
We didn't talk about sex. We barely talked about periods. When I got mine, it was here's a selection of products. This is what they're for. Go. And even then, like, they were only pads because we never talked about tampons because those were also not, um, not something that we discussed on how to insert, insert. And so and this goes way back, right? When we think about how women are treated when they're on their period, they're not allowed to sleep in the same room as their husband. They're not allowed to go to the temple. They're not allowed to participate in cultural activities. And it's it seems very bizarre as a first generation Canadian as to why we are not allowed to do certain things because we're going through the natural process of our lives, which eventually lead to birthing children. And growing up, I remember being kind of pushed aside when my mom knew I was on my period or whatever. And I always kind of felt like that was such a big diss. I was like, what is the big deal? All women experience this. So,
Yeah.
Um, and so when we look at pregnancy and postpartum, it's a similar attitude towards it. It's very hush hush. And I don't know how a lot of traditional families approach this, but for myself, my husband was in the room with me holding my hand during both of my deliveries, and my mother-in-law was uncomfortable coming into the room.
Hmm.
Whereas, I was at the Toronto Birthing Center, so we were allowed visitors while I was in labor. And so, like, my mom came in for a few minutes. My sister visited me. My sister-in-law stayed for both of my births, and my mother-in-law couldn't do it. And it was just because she felt like I was so vulnerable and exposed that she couldn't be part of that, which is also interesting because she's herself had birthed two children. And so it comes out in different ways when you look at families and how they approach it. And most of the time in these situations, women will always be the one to surround the new mother, whether it's to take care of her or help with the baby, if the mother has that kind of support. But we don't talk about pelvic health, and because there's already so much stigma around talking about your body and what it's doing naturally,
Hmm.
we're not inclined to tell somebody in our family, even our partners, that oh my god, like I'm peeing my pants when I'm going to the grocery store. It's something that causes a lot of embarrassment. And the mental health aspect of it is a really big portion that, again, we don't talk about, because even postpartum depression is something that culturally, mental health is something that is new in terms of getting it treated. And when we look at new mothers, it's like, well, what do you have to be upset about? You have this beautiful child that you just brought into the world, so what's there to be depressed about? And we both know that it's unexplainable,
Yeah.
how we feel, and there's a lot of physical things that are happening when you add things like body image, and the way for feeling pain day to day. If we're unable to explain why we feel a heaviness down there, and it just feels like there's nobody to talk to, and you kind of close in on yourself, and that,
Hmm.
again, that promotes that feeling of isolation that we
Hmm.
already feel as new mothers. And it can it can be the tip of the iceberg for mental health as well, and your emotional state.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you look at it as a whole package, when you already don't feel like yourself, and all of these things are happening to you, and you're feeling isolated, and you feel like you have nobody to talk to, then what? So
Mm-hmm.
we move through life quiet. And a lot of women move through life very quiet. They don't tell anybody. They just deal with what they have been dealt and assume that there is nobody out there to help them. But there's
Yeah.
people like myself and a lot of other professionals I know who are screaming it from the rooftops, because we are here to help you, and you don't have to go through this alone, and you don't have to live with these symptoms.
Right. Yeah, and I think you brought up a good point there about women in our culture not being able to talk to even their partners about things
Yeah. Yeah.
because periods, any pelvic floor issues, leaks, those are some of the things. I mean, I feel even our partners would be embarrassed to hear it.
Absolutely. I mean, it depends on how progressive your partner is.
Yeah.
But even, my husband he's born and raised here, but he still cringes a little bit when he hears me talking about this stuff, and I'm
Yeah.
always screaming about it. But you're right. And I think a big piece of that is because we're so conditioned as women and South Asian women to not be talking about these things because they're considered women's problems.
Yeah.
And men don't need to know.
Yeah.
What is he going to gain from knowing? But that also affects your mental health again, because it affects your body image and how you feel about yourself and your confidence levels.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking from experience, having even a low grade prolapse, which is quite mild in the grand scheme of things, that can happen to women. Um, the extent that it affected my confidence, I can't even put into words. I felt awful about myself, because now the one thing that I knew really gave me confidence that I loved to do, which was physical fitness and
Yeah.
strength training, I couldn't even do that to the extent that I wanted to at the time. And that just depleted me in so many ways. And
Yeah.
so it's very layered and complex, the way that it can affect
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
And it's something we don't often think about, and we're told to write off.
Yeah. And I feel like this is one of those things you just accept as, oh, well, I'm a mother now, things are different. And when our baby is sick or something we don't know, or something, there's an issue, we'll always, first thing we'll do is Google it. What's going on, But something like this, I feel like women are even shy to Google something like that or search for, is this even normal? Especially in
Yeah,
our
and I mean,
culture.
yeah, and that's a tough one. I think with the accessibility to the internet, it's pretty easy to Google things like that, in private, and we can even do it in incognito mode,
Yeah.
so it doesn't show up in our search history. But once again, when you Google something like that, you're going to get so many different answers
Hmm.
that it makes that overwhelm even worse, really, because there's just so
Right.
much information now. And, as somebody who, if you're a new mother, you already have so much going on with worrying about your baby's health. I Googled everything with my firstborn. I remember, like, he's breathing weird. Is that normal? And so, we're already overwhelmed as it is with caring for new life, no matter how our family had changed. And to add this on top of that makes it even more stressful in ways that we can't explain. And so finding credible sources of information is so important, and they are out there, but how we find them is a little bit tricky. And for somebody like me, it's really hard to get out of that realm, because I am so immersed in this world that
Yeah.
when somebody tells me that they've never even heard of pelvic floor physio, I'm almost in shock. But that is very, very common
Right.
because literally nobody has told them about this.
Yeah.
And culturally, it's one thing to not talk about it. But then we look at our relationships with our doctors, and women are embarrassed to speak to their doctors about this. So,
Mm-hmm.
where down the line are we going to learn about this if we're not going to be speaking to each other?
Yeah.
And and then we look on the other side of the spectrum of being, in Western society and social media, and we see all these beautiful fair-skinned blonde women who have bounced back fitting into their jeans just a couple of weeks after birth, and you're going, what the heck happened,
Mm-hmm.
and so where we fit in is really interesting. And so now we're seeing this big wave of pushing those taboos out of the way and saying, let's speak about this. And the
Mm-hmm.
interesting thing is that most women are learning about this stuff through the internet and now through
Mm-hmm.
podcasts
Yeah.
and social media. And we're talking about it. We're saying the word vagina and we're not cringing
Yeah.
about it. And we're talking about periods and birth and all of the things that
Yeah.
we never got the chance to actually speak to our families about, or even our partners in a lot of cases.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's so true. It's almost liberating to talk about these things because that's what it is. It is what it is, right? You touched on the common issue that we have with pelvic floor dysfunction after childbirth. And the most common one, I feel, and correct me if I'm wrong, is leaking or peeing while you cough or sneeze. And is that right?
It's hard to say what the most common ones are. I mean, from what I hear, in the grapevine, yes. I mean, is that an official stat? I can't confirm that.
Yeah.
Um, a physiotherapist could probably do that.
Right.
But yeah, like these are very common signs and things that we experience. And the chances of it happening to somebody else that are very, very high. But again, even within mom groups, we never talked about this. I was in a lot of postnatal groups with my first son, and I was usually only one of maybe two brown women or even
Yeah.
colored women in the group, and nobody ever talked about these things
Yeah.
because they probably were embarrassed about it, to
Yeah.
be frank. And you have every right to feel that way, but
Yeah.
chances are if you speak to your friends about it, they're going to go, oh my god, me too. Like, what is this feeling, and
Yeah.
why does this happen to me?
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. And I think we do need to talk on platforms like this so that we can normalize it a lot more.
Absolutely.
If it is a medical condition, it could be covered through medical services plan.
You'd have to discuss that with your doctor.
Right.
And on that topic, a lot of healthcare professionals, doctors and OBs, are just starting to catch up to this
Yeah.
type of support for women. We're often dismissed quite very often and very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
um, and often told that this is just part of motherhood, or that they don't have anybody that they can refer you to. If they know that you can't afford it, they won't bother to offer that to you. Or if they think you can't afford it, rather. And that's really unfortunate. So this is another area in terms of accessibility that does need more attention, is that healthcare professionals need to start catching up to the idea that they can refer out. And if a client is or patient is coming in and saying they're having these issues, that there is somebody out there to help them, that they don't have to live with it. But more often than not, I hear stories from women who have spoken to their doctors, who have spoken to their OBs, and have been quickly dismissed, saying, well, it is what it is. You had a baby, so this is your life now, which is
Right.
really unfortunate.
Right. So how do you help women? Like, say, if I was seeing a physiotherapist and I had some, a pelvic floor dysfunction, and how would you help in your role as a fitness coach?
So, as a fitness coach, I specialize in pre and postnatal fitness.
Right.
And my goal is to help women in that kind of gray zone of, I've done my recovery and rehab, now what? How do I get to that goal of running my first 5K? How do I get to that goal of lifting like I used to? And this doesn't mean you have to have dysfunction in order to see a pelvic floor physiotherapist. I think it's something that everybody should have as part of universal health care. Just as we see our doctors annually for a physical, this should be part of it. And even if you don't have any issues per se, it's still best to take the safe and effective route, because you never know if down the road, if you push yourself too much now, is it going to affect you down the road?
Right.
So my suggestion is always to go the safer route, and it is sometimes a more boring route with rehab and recovery, but we have to also be kind to ourselves and acknowledge that it took 9 months to grow a human, and then this human came out of our bodies. So whether we pushed it out or it was done through major abdominal surgery, your body is just not going to be as it used to be. And that's okay, because most women I know who have had children are actually stronger now in their athleticism than they ever were before.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I feel that I just had this drive to get back into shape at any cost. But obviously, I have to be honest, I did ignore my pelvic health. I did have issues with leaks and just, certain exercises I would do, they weren't correct. And just that, I think also the issue here is time. Mothers usually don't have that kind of time to take for themselves. And when they do have the time, they want to just rest and recoup and rejuvenate their bodies. I love the connection that is made here on this episode in regards to pelvic health, the connection between physio and fitness. Because it really is. Fitness is something that everyone wants to, all women, most women want to get back into shape, and there's a lot of, drive to be fit, but then there's the physio link and the how to do it properly. And that link missing, right? So I love that. I love that connection. And if they, what would you like to say to women out there in regards to their pelvic health and fitness as a takeaway message?
I would say that, if you are pregnant, then you don't have to prove anything to anybody. Scaling back is okay during pregnancy, and a major goal during pregnancy, if you are active and you're able to exercise, is to maintain your strength and stability. We don't have to reach new PRs during pregnancy, like sometimes we see on the internet. And staying active throughout pregnancy has been proven to be healthy for both you and baby, provided that your doctor or healthcare professional advises you to be active during pregnancy. And in postpartum, I mean, taking care of our bodies, I would like that to be first and foremost. All of our attention goes onto this new being in our lives, and of course they demand us 24/7, but we can't forget about ourselves, because if we don't take care of ourselves, it just depletes us further and further. And I'm speaking from the experience of somebody who took all the steps to see a physio and start getting active in my postpartum period, but also experienced postpartum depression and anxiety, and eventually, sought therapy for that. And because we don't think about the other factors that weigh into that. We don't consider the sleep deprivation and how much that impacts our daily lives. We don't think about how physically demanding newborns and children are, especially if you have multiple kids. The physical demands in your day-to-day life are extraordinary sometimes. We're squatting, lifting, twisting, turning, carrying things, and oftentimes doing, multiple tasks at once. And so when we look at fitness strictly from a working out standpoint, it almost compartmentalizes it into this whole realm of, oh, well, I have to be fit and I have to be in shape. But we have to also look at it as a holistic approach. And if you don't love to work out, if you don't have specific fitness goals, that's totally okay. Look at it from a life standpoint. Do you want to be able to lift all the groceries and your toddler in your arm because we don't want to run back and forth to the car? Do we have so many daily demands that we have to meet? Plus, when you do return to work, if you choose to do that, then you have that aspect of it too. And so life in a holistic viewpoint has a lot of physical demands of us, and so taking care of ourselves should be first and foremost. And unfortunately for a lot of us, that often takes the back burner position because we have so many other things that we feel are more important. But I always like to say you cannot pour from an empty cup. So if there's one piece of advice, I know I'm rambling now, but if there's one piece of advice I would say is take the time to take care of yourself. And whether that means getting active or whether that means taking some time to get some extra sleep, whatever it means for you, take the time to do that because you deserve it. And frankly, you need it for yourself.
Yeah. And it pays dividends in the long run. You're able to preserve your energy. You have when you may think you're exerting more energy in the beginning because it's habits take a little long to build. But once you're there, like once you're at that stage where you are taking care of yourself and you do have a regimen set in place, it really does help a lot in your daily life, in your energy levels and how you are around, and even mentally. Exercise has helped me. I mean, that's the only thing that helped me with my depression after childbirth and lifted me up.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's looking at the holistic viewpoint of how is this going to impact your life. And for me it's the same thing. The mental health aspect of it is huge. That's probably the number one reason that I love to, or used to love, escaping to the gym, and now I try to do that in my house, or even just getting out for a walk and being active. We know that it releases endorphins, and it is good for mental health and for calming your nervous system and just keeping you healthy for the long run. And we also have to consider that women also are at risk of osteoporosis down the road, once we reach our 50s. And then there's so many other things, balancing hormones and heart disease affects women too. And so when we look at all of these stats for the things that affect us, it doesn't mean that we're going to be immune to them, but we can take those preventative measures now. And why not now? If not now, then when, really?
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Reena, for coming to our show and sharing your wonderful insights with us. And I'm sure this information will help women just even realize that pelvic health is important and that it's time to normalize a lot of the stigmas and cultural taboos that still exist in our culture.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
This is Mama's High on Chai.
That's all for today, mamas. Make sure to follow me on Instagram and Twitter on Mama's High on Chai. I want to hear from all of you, all the mamas that are listening, and please leave me a voice message by clicking on the link at the bottom of the show notes. It'll also be available on my Twitter page. So make sure you go on there and leave me a voice message. I really want to hear from you, and send me your questions, comments, suggestions, feedback. I want to hear it all. So tune in every Tuesday for a new episode. Until then, stay high on chai and stay high on life. See ya!